Yes, welcome to 2019 as well. I did a bunch of crazy stuff, went and got married, went on a honeymoon, did all this crazy adult stuff, which was cool. But then I look back on the previous year and I was like, I seriously did not do enough SecTalks talks. So we're starting off the year and I would like to touch a little bit on some OSINT, or some open source intelligence. And I guess the one thing I want you to take away from this is we are going back to some of the very fundamental basics, but we're looking at ways we can kind of modify and manipulate it a little bit to get some really focused, targeted results. And a lot of time, if you deep dive in something enough, you can make it dedicated, or you can make it the main focus of that engagement, rather than being kind of a sub-activity or a small component of, say, a greater pen test, or say a red team or something like that. So very quickly about myself, I currently manage the PrivaSec red team down here in Melbourne, and I founded DroneSec, which is now within PrivaSec services. So we do a bunch of stuff with drone security and counter drones and so forth. At PrivaSec, we do red teaming, pen testing, the usual, and obviously OSINT engagements, which are, I find, one of the funnest things you can do as a hacker, because people pay you to do the stuff that you were already doing in your room all those years ago, or whatever it is. So first off, you may have seen the title was Letters from a Stoic. So this comes back to Stoicism, and I'll give you just a really quick, brief intro as to what that is. Basically, go back to the Greek olden times. Stoicism actually comes from the word stoa pokila. I can't actually mention that, but someone did Greek to talk about it. But basically, it was a gathering place where they exchanged ideas and lectures and all that. I see that very similar to something like SecTalks, but basically Stoics were people who would say lose everything in life and look to start again from a philosophical point of view. So we are doing something similar in this type of engagement, where we strip away everything else, we go vanilla. Let's do what we do with zero tools whatsoever, just ourselves in a browser or a mobile phone or something like that. What happens if we do complete and utter focus on the observable evidence and things right in front of us, rather than trying to make assumptions about things, and then of course making rational connections by logic. Now all these are very philosophical, wish-washy words, but they'll make sense, I promise, as we go into it. And again, through this whole thing, we're going to follow, going back to the Greeks, the olive tree branch investigative method, which is basically getting one piece of information. You want to find juicy stuff around that, and you make a word cloud, or you gather information about that one thing. Can everyone hear me okay with this? That sounds a lot louder. Cool. And so then you follow a branch, or you follow a lead, and then once you've figured out everything from there, you take all the good targets, the juicy stuff you found, you bring it back to the branch, and you restart your search with all those new pieces of information. This is an absolutely incredible way of finding stuff that we want to find, to basically tell all the other guys, this is what could affect you or your organization. So a quick intro on what we're going to cover and what we're not going to cover. Tools. Open source intelligence is a huge, huge field. There are so many tools to do it with. There are scripts, there are ways to plug in information and get it spat out very quickly. But what we want to focus on today is how to really deep dive on pieces of information that might not be input-output. You might need to actually look at it and make logical, rational decisions on putting those two together. Again, minimal requirements. We want you to be able to undertake this with just a browser. And we're also not doing mass OSINT. So when we talk about targets or looking at specific people and trying to track them down, we're doing it one person at a time. Even if you're looking at 5 people or 10 people, you spend the 2 days or the 5 days or the 10 days on one person, and then you go to the next, and this is very important. So why are we trying to do this? OSINT, or looking at a organization or person or assets footprint online, is a good way of actually assessing all the different attack methods that we can do to this organization without having to simply just go straight in and start doing a pen test on them or something like that. So basically, if we're scoping a pen test for a certain server or website that place owns, why are we doing that if one of their subdomains, one of their domains is leading to a critical server that they just don't know about, which would have a much greater effect on it? Now, of course, there's always defense in depth. There's lots of layers. We always need those pen tests. But this is a way of discovering all those little individual items that might be very high risk. With people, what could cripple an organization to the ground very quickly? If we find blackmail, extortion, fraud, evidence, all those types of nasty things on a single person, and they're, say, a key staff or an executive, those would cripple that organization if modeled correctly by an attacker. So we want to look for those as well, and obviously if assess their threat surface, very business excellence word, but it gives us an overview of, these guys are really publishing a lot of information in their social media, but their website and their server files and all seem to be okay. So we'll get to that point. And then, of course, at the end of the engagement, let me go back, we basically want to go to that organization or that person and help them tighten the reins on releasing all this. We can say that, you've been releasing all this kind of stuff over a period of months or years. On this day, you released this on your social media, and this is helping attackers find a way in. So we'll go into this with more detail as we go along, but what we'll be covering is basically making OSINT a main engagement. So not just that little bit in a pentest and red team, but really selling it to a company and saying, we will do a pure open source intelligence gathering operation or digital footprint exercise, whatever you want to call it, for you. We then want to quickly go through Google Docs, which I'm sure almost all of you are familiar with, going back to 65 AD type of thing, as they will help us when we're going through some of these new techniques. And then, of course, we'll go through a concept called social chaining, go through some transformation, all these big words, and look at how we can extract information from social media and sites and so forth that is not indexable, which means we can't just simply put in a string or enter in an API or something that pops out. Cool. So, dedicated OSINT engagements. Sorry, I'm going to have to look at my slides because these ones are pretty small. So, first of all, what are the biggest things that could affect an organization? Blackmail, extortion, fraud, scandals, smear campaigns, all that kind of stuff on targeted individuals. So this is the first component of our test that we're going to tell this company we'll do a part of. The next one is the sentiment or the online profile. If we have, say, a forum discussing all the different ways how to hack into their designated product or a certain area that this company operates or runs in, that's something we want to be known of. If there's, say, an employee who was injured at work and they've got this massive vendetta against the company where they're constantly posting on Reddit for weeks and weeks saying, I'm going to get these guys, that's something else we just want to know about. And we're not including the morals and ethics of whether that's not right at this point. This is simply us trying to gauge how much threat there is on their open source platforms that affect the organization. And of course, we come down to the IT infrastructure, which is in a passive state. We're just looking for things like breached accounts and password dumps, information that might help us, say, send an email from one of their domains as a phishing email, gives us that heightened privilege. All these little bits of IT infrastructure that, when chained together with all three, can make a really high confident attack, where we're pretty sure we're going to get into something or somewhere or so forth. So obviously, the output of all three of these, hopefully, if you're doing an engagement, you can ask to do all three. Otherwise, you can say just focus on the people or that or whatever. It works either way. But there's many kind of things that can come out of it, including saying to them, by the way, we found this is probably your worst case scenario where you're probably going to potentially get hit, and this is how to kind of tighten that a little bit. Again, IT, individuals, and the online sentiment or profile. I'll go through this really quickly because a lot of you know these already and they're super simple. But when we're looking for different sources of information for the IT infrastructure, for example, if we're looking for all their different subdomains, we might use a bunch of tools. We might look at certificate authorities and see the different subdomains or domains that have been submitted to them. Obviously, search engines is going to appear in all of those. We look at archives and repositories for files that have accidentally been uploaded, say, on a search engine and then grabbed off, and that file server has been cached. Obviously, we all love the dark web keyword, but we don't see very much in there because everyone knows it's just a giant honeypot for the FBI. But at the same point, we do check it in different areas where we can. Most of the time, you're going to find it in private chat conversations or that kind of thing. Again, with individuals, super, super simple. We're keeping it to a browser and a social media sites, basically. That's all we're using to find stuff on them. And of course, for the organizational profile, similar type of thing. Cool. So I will quickly get a raise of hands who's used and knows of Google Docs. Cool. Okay, most of you, which is awesome. So Google Docs are a way to do, say, a regex or a fine-tune, a filter, what have you, in, let's say, Google. So Google allows you to enter these little keywords, which allows it to come up with a very targeted result. So we're only going to use these in everything we're talking about today, and the first one is very simple. It's just the time date option. So this means if you put a search into Google and you modify that time date function to, say, August 1994, before even most of the internet, you're probably going to only come up with things that may have been, say, cached at that point in time, or when Google went and spied that page. Moving along, if you put in NASA without any apostrophes, you may come up with nasal products, right? But if you put apostrophes around it, it's only going to match that term, which means you can just get that alone, especially if it's a very weird or difficult name. If you put a negative before a word, it basically means that you're going to return all pages that contain this green word, but that don't contain space. So you'll find all the searches for NASA that do not have space anywhere in that page. Moving along, the same thing happens for websites. If you put a negative website, you're simply going to exclude all the nasa.gov searches, so you're only going to get third-party searches. Okay? And then again, if you put site, nasa.gov, you're going to come up with results that only affect NASA. So in this case, you're going to get a bunch of terms that contain secret that are all part of nasa.gov. You're not going to get any other websites. And sorry if I sound like a broken record, but these are really the key fundamentals that we just use for the rest of the presentation. File type. You can put PDF, doc, JPEG, whatever have you, and if you put a word in there, it's going to find only PDFs on the internet that contain that search term. And the last one is in URL. This basically means that you can find any URLs that contain that term. This is useful, for example, if you're searching for, say, a drive, the A drive, the D share, the B server, or whatever. If you put in a directory path or something like that, you might find items or URLs that contain files that disclose the directory file structure or the directory path. So the first one, which we're not going to cover in too much detail, as I mentioned, was the organizational profile. You've got to tell them what you're going to be covering in this engagement and why it will matter to them. Well, first and foremost, you're looking for anything that's security, safety, and threat related. And the second one is the sentiment, news, chatter, reviews, anything that might give you an angle as to what to do when you're phishing someone or phishing the company or attacking the company. They may have had a merger, or may have had an acquisition, big things like that, right? And small things we look for in things like this may include buildings or blueprints for building layout plans, different conversations, sentiment, as I mentioned before. So that's what we look for in the organizational profile. I'm not going to cover too much of that because you kind of get the general gist and it's simply kind of locked in with the rest of the results. The next one we want to focus on is the selected individuals. Usually how this will work is we grab, say, 5 key staff from that organization, so the CEO, the CTO, someone who's in charge of security there, something like that, and we are going to drag net operation, gather every single thing about them. We're talking everything we can find within a certain amount of time, hopefully a couple of days per person at least, and we basically want to find personal identifiable information to create attack vectors, like phishing emails or scams or all those kind of things that other people could use. So things like relationships, things that, what they own, who they are, all those kind of things are very important. Let's try and collect it all. Small things that we try and look for can include one of the following. There's a lot of stuff there, but basically we can kind of categorize it like, this is information we're probably going to find very easily, and it's used to start building a profile on that person. The next ones in green are probably more targeted information that we can use, that we keep building on. We've got technical vectors. If we know what model PC they have, if we know what kind of devices they have, we can basically fine-tune our phishing emails and say, your HP Packard 911 whatever laptop is needing a patch and so forth. And so it's very focused. So those are more technical vectors. And of course, you come down to the sensitive side of things, which is blackmail and extortion, not necessarily relationships, dating, cheating. I put those in there because, to be honest, they're not really going to hurt the organization. This is more for the person. And you've got to keep remembering that we're looking at what could compromise an entire organization. Sure, that might be a way in, but it's not necessarily the worst of the worst. So you can imagine there's a few other things here like insider trading, corporate espionage, all those kind of things, which can be very scary. Okay, so let's kind of start as if we were looking for an individual. You've got a name, you've plugged into Google. We're going to use Google for the rest of this presentation. And it comes up with almost no results. So something you need to be aware of when you're starting off a search for a single person is that names can take on many forms, okay? So for example, in formalities, I may be Mr. Monnik. I may have a doctorate degree, so I might be referred to as Dr. Monnik or Dr. M. Monnik. I may have been, I guess, the son of a pastor or professional or professor, P.S. Monnik, whatever that is. And then, of course, you've got things like initials, M. Monnik, M.M., M.X., M. Monnik Jr. All of these are search terms which you need to be aware of when you're trying to track a person down. The other thing is friends. People might call me different things. You need to be aware of that, especially with social media. If you're really trying to hunt a person down, you need to kind of make some assumptions, and then obviously only accept them when they're presented as evidence. Some examples are when, say, lotteries try and sanitize people's names, and they put, say, a Mr. MM from Melbourne won the Powerball. Well, if we've got evidence on his social media account that he was spending big or celebrating something, we can kind of put those two together. For example, sometimes real estate agents will say, M and F, Monnik's beautiful home was sold with Bitcoin, blah, blah, blah. We can, again, kind of link some of those things. But we wouldn't have found this with Mike Monnik. We would only find this if the search term matched that. So remember, with those apostrophes, looking for something specific, we need to do specific searches and non-specific searches to match all instances of this coming up. I don't think this is something that might show up if you're trying to track it. But for example, some guys, talking about Mick M, who is part of a vegan protesters group, he's not meant to be doing that, or he's meant to be doing that, or whatever it is, and, it was posted on Reddit. That's another kind of name where it's a short form. You may have to make some assumptions if, my name matched with that, and if you knew my social media displayed that. Again, just talking about instances where we have seen people's names be used in short form or different types. So keep those all in mind. These should all be forming part of your word cloud for that exact person. Another thing that we can use is social chaining. And this occurs when, for example, let's say we went on Facebook and we didn't find anything about that person at all. Nothing came up, didn't find a name. So what we could do is we take the subject's name and we go into Facebook and we put his surname in. And we find a woman with the surname he has. Now, we don't know whether this is his mother or not, but it seems to indicate it, so we keep following that lead. Now, her Facebook account is completely private. You can't see anything. However, her friends finder section does allow you to search for other people. So we do a search again for his surname, and we find his partner or his wife at the time. Now, this didn't display previously because she's turned on non-indexing, which means Google didn't index her anywhere, she wasn't searchable, but she's searchable now because we're using the trust of someone else, his mother. So based on this, we look at the URL bar and we see that her name in the URL is actually something different, and that's because it was her maiden name before they got married. So now we've got something going back to that olive tree branch. We can add another word into our pool of things, okay? So we've now got her initials with her maiden name. We now go back to searching in Google or something like that, and we find that she used to run a home business. That home business on ABN details always tells the location of which she registered it, which means we found a suburb. Might not be the suburb where he is, but it was the suburb where she had or started a business back when she was not married. If every single one of these steps, you just keep putting down a word cloud and collecting different names and different things about these people, you'll slowly, with enough time, be able to track some of these things down. The next one is that we search that registered suburb with their initial initial name, and we find a post on Google from a real estate agent only using the initials, referencing the house with a beautiful house, but it's a picture of them. So now we can make that rational kind of consideration or conclusion that this was him, and we now have his personal home address. It took a few hoops, but it means that we can add that home address to the record of things. And now what we do is go back on the tree branch again and start searching for him with anything to do with that address. We hit the government portals, we hit the information portals, we start searching everything that relates to that address, and so that starts a brand new search area, or search net in a way. So that can happen in many different social media accounts, different types everywhere, but it's just that method of collecting it and continuing on with each new bit of evidence. Something else we can look at now, let's say we've gained some information from the personal or individual side of things, is looking at, say, things within an organization like IT networking, the server information, anything that if we had a red team happen and that red team was inside the organization, what could we provide them that would mean minimal disruption and hitting those targets very quickly? If you were to go into, actually I won't use PwC as an example. If you were to go into privacy and you already knew that we had, say, an H drive and a G drive, all those shares, and you knew exactly what documents were on there because they had already been cached into Google, you could drop right into that organization, visit those drives or add them, and collect the information without having to do things like scanning through them all or making network traffic. Now, that's all wishy-washy. There's a lot of things involved with that, but basically this does speed up the attack vectors if you know exactly what they have that's been put online. Things like subdomains are super useful. Directory structure and knowing some of those can be useful for more web attacks or pen tests and so forth. And of course, if you have any credentials, default accounts, things that you can use against that organization. So, again, going back to the word cloud, some of the ways that we can get a lot of information about an organization and what it's hosting and so forth is, let's say we had one file here. We found this on Google by simply searching for, and I'll put it here, Cloud A2, which is our, say, dummy organization, and we put the keyword sensitive, super simple Google Dork stuff, and we went file type PDF. Came up with this because the keyword here matched level sensitive. Now we can go through here and basically create a word cloud. We can have people to start searching for with this organization. We've got keywords all through it. We've got a document reference with a P drive potentially there, and lots of keywords. And what we think might be level sensitive might be a classification as well, the way that they classify their documents. Now, I can tell you right now this organization doesn't or may not care about this document. It's sensitive, but maybe that's their lowest classification. We don't know what their highest is. We want to find that out, right? So, the first thing we could do is, for that K, we can search everything within that site that would turn up with the different drives. Now we try K, we got J, H, G, we try every single drive we can. Manual process, of course, you can automate it, you can script it very easily, but it means that we might find other documents, we might be able to figure out what kind of internal drives they have, and that kind of thing. Just useful. Again, going up to one of the things we saw on this one here, which was the WP number, just like, say, bug bounties or web attacks, you can simply just brute force one of those. So again, have your little keyword, but instead of the date there being 31st of December 2019, you start at 1st of January 2014. Just go all the way up. The amount of documents you might find that are just referenced or indexed on Google by simply brute forcing it may also increase that level of verbosity. Again, if you think this company is dealing with sensitive things and you want to find out whether they have documents relating to those, we can put in a number of different keywords from Department of Defense to military to Army, depending on if they service, based on their tenders there, if they service, say, military areas or departments with those telecommunications channels. Those can be submitted with everything from confidential, sensitive, private, official use only, personal, and the list goes on. And of course, you can search division by division. At this point, I'm just repeating myself. There's so many words we can choose from, but each one can be unique and kind of paired with some of those individuals and those, technological kind of things that we've gotten off the net, we can start getting a really clear idea of what's out there, what other people have on them, and what they have themselves. And of course, this extends If you're dealing with a company that has designers, they might have CAD drawings. If you're dealing with a company that has, different types of, technologies, you can use those file types and so forth. Something else that can be very interesting is indirect leads or searching for non-indexable information. So let's say we had a phone number of a target. That phone number, the target may have set up all their social media accounts, but we have no way of finding that out. We can search into Google or do whatever you do with all your different tools, and it might find you one or two results. But there are different ways to get around that and find exactly what they have using or abusing the trust of third-party systems. So similar to SQL injection, where you're using the trust of the web server to make queries in the database, we can get other applications to make queries on our behalf and not look like user input. So the first one is Snapchat. This is an interesting one where, for example, if you have a person's mobile number and you put it into Snapchat and you try and find them based on that, it's going to search for usernames based on that number. It's not actually going to find it, and it won't identify or pick up, that it's right there. And it basically says to itself, well, there's no handles that are matching this mobile number, so in that kind of sense, we're not going to display it. If, however, you go and add that number as a contact within your phone and choose the sync option within Snapchat, it will sync and use Snapchat's syncing process to see it as a trusted contact and then match the phone number with the handle and the user as an entity rather than a search term. I guess this might explain a little bit better, but basically when you're searching it by itself and say the username search, it's giving it a low priority or a low privilege type of search, and it doesn't match. Whereas, and this is up until now obviously, if you're searching through a trusted contact, it's going to come up with everything related to that contact there. Next one is Truecaller, and I'm sure many of you have heard of or seen Truecaller before. There are a number of them these days, and they're growing in, they're growing in number. But let's say you're at SecTalks and you meet someone named Mike, and you want to get his email, but you lost contact with him at the bar, and you're looking for it afterwards. So you go into an app or a website and plug in that name, and it comes up, and it's got all his information. It's got his first name, it's got his last name, it's got his number, it's got his email. And so you're like, great, this is perfect. It just gets you to install the app. You do that, and it shows you everything about it. Now, the problem here is that this is allowing someone else to get all my information. I didn't authorize it at all, but you don't know where it came from. Now, the thing is that Truecaller is based on a third-party submission process. Whenever you install its app, whenever you install its plugin, it goes into your entire contacts list. Yes, it's just like the tiniest little T's and C's tick box. And it uploads every single one of your contacts with all their information up into its own privileged database. That means when people want to find that information, they also find someone and then they upload theirs. And it creates a bit of a hive where all these different people are being uploaded, their information is being shared and so forth. And one of the other things it does, which is actually pretty cool, I must admit, is, for example, if lots of people have, let's say my name was John. Johnny as contacts. Some of them might name it Johnny, his girlfriend might call him Mr. Cuggles, someone else might call him Johnny Boy. It will actually kind of detect how many different changes there are, summarize it, and give it a name, or give it a name like John McCormick, based on what it's seen. And it will associate that number. Now, there's something much worse with it, by the way, if you look into it. Truecaller used to base people's identities based on their EMI number, which meant if someone else got your phone after your profile had already been created, you used to be able to modify someone else's profile. You used to be able to create things about them and so forth. Now, that's bad for a number of reasons, but I guess coming back to the fact of Truecaller, we could potentially use this ourselves to get information that is non-indexable, because it's their private it's their private database in a way. We could upload or submit fake data that would cloud that and create a few issues with it there. Or you could potentially build your own, which I have not done, and face massive PII and GDPR and privacy issues of having everyone in the room's contact information. But the point was, if you met someone and tried to get their information, you're not really relying on them to give it to you, you're relying on a third party. So there's lots of these that exist, but it's a good way of seeing how, for example, we're trying to find CEO's details, it may not come down to him on protecting his information. It might just be one of many contacts in his contact list that has submitted the information on behalf of him. So utilizing some of these, and I realize, we're flying through time, but one or two of these are ways we can, I guess, give examples on how to use some of this information that we've seen, that we haven't seen, and so forth, in regards to categorizing all this information, having a word pool about that person, having all those details, and abusing it. The first, for example, is a person who we find lots of things to kind of demonstrate. He's won a lot of competitions. Most of them are through Boost Mobile. He's been doing this for many years, and every time he wins, it publicly mentions his name, and it mentions what he won. So obviously, one of the ways you could get in here, if he's working for an organization, you're targeting him, is to send him a spear phishing email saying, thank you for submitting all these competitions. We've got a new one for you, and we're upgrading your data plan. Sign in here. Now, because of the consistency that he's had with these competitions over time, and because of the publicity and the fact that he obviously likes it happening to him and his data increasing, is more likely to click on something like this. Again, these are all just up in the air. They may not be proven, but they are things that you can think of when you're collecting this information. The next one is, for example, a CEO who has gone and posted on a business Facebook page, and his completely private. His profile is locked down. You can't see any posts. However, you do not control what other people post on, say, a business account or someone else's Facebook page. So he's gone into this business and he's like, man, I had this terrible experience. It was the worst, horrible decision. I'll never trade with you guys again, blah, blah, blah. And we can also find, going through the news articles about this, that other people were affected by this one scenario. And so we know that because there's this emotional connection, he was really mad at this, we can basically see that his logic will go out the door because there's an emotional appeal. He feels like he's been hurt and he needs something back. So we could spearfish them. And for example, just to be very clear when I'm saying we're spearfishing them and all, this is from the engagement perspective to show how these examples could be used, or if we're in a red team type of attack. So we mimic the business that wronged him, and we basically say, we're really, really sorry, we want to make it up for you. Can we provide you with this free, say, voucher or this free product or whatnot? And simply, attach a malicious payload or request information and so forth. Just another attack vector that we can see by measuring through and gaining all that kind of information on that person. And the thing is, you end up with, if you do OSINT engagements where you spend a lot of time on that person, you're probably coming up with about 5 to 10 different scenario vectors to hit them with. And each one has its different, I guess, priorities. Each one has its, positives and negatives. And it comes down to choosing the right one based on, social engineering tactics. Some interesting ones, for example, that you see over time is if you're simply looking for security officers or reviews or the security guards and third-party officers that are protecting a site. If you search enough in regards to that, you can sometimes find them leaving reviews that are very verbose. Things like he's telling you exactly where some guys broke into the place that you are trying to break in as a red team as well. Or they say things like my job is super boring. I answer calls. I do some faxes. I do 1 or 2 things that are unrelated to my job, which kind of tells us it's a little bit more of a hybrid role. They may potentially not be kind of standing on guard waiting for someone to enter the premises and go and get them. So for red teaming, that makes that site a lot more attractive to hit in a physical sense. If we're on that decision tree of saying which way would be best for us to hit that site. Obviously, it gives us a good pretext as well. We could walk in, shake our head, and if it's the same guy working on his shift, we could say, man, those guys at night, have been getting in and just, drive me up the wall. I'm here to replace you or whatever. You can come up with a million solutions, but it gives you that added information about that person and what they're going through. 2 quick other ones. For example, these are super simple, and being in security, everybody is very, well aware of these. But targets that have their pets or pets' names on social media and show a lot of love about them and all, sometimes that can be quite a high confidence password attack. You get a word list, you modify it to pets' names or so forth, and you might be able to pop some of their passwords or their secret questions. And the same goes for anyone with, say, financial assets or things that they like to showboat or have online. A CEO with a very specific vehicle make that he proudly shows off everywhere. they've got an emotional connection to that, and so if you're able to model your attacks around that, you could most likely get a very good result or high level of confidence in that attack that it might be working. So while super short, I guess the point of this is dedicated OSINT engagements basically give you an in to really dig down on some of these pieces of information and give a comprehensive kind of word cloud or list of ideas to give to your red team. It allows them to have more choices, allows your pen testers to know more about the company before they actually just scope in on one box. And it also allows you to have a higher rate of success if you're looking at something, considering, if we hit this site, there's guard dogs, it's dangerous, but a review tells us there's something over here we can go through. That decision-making choice or process is made a lot easier. And of course, something we see a lot is chaining those three together, having the profile or the sentiment of the organization as a whole, along with the people search and the IT assets. You can create incredibly high successful rate chained attacks, combining all three of those against a single person. So if you're interested in, I guess, different types of OSINT intelligence gathering operations or the different ways they track things down and so forth, I would highly recommend looking into Bellingcat. Hunchly is a great tool when you have no other tools. It simply goes and catalogs every page you visit as an investigator. It allows you keyword search everything you've ever visited before, meaning you can create those word clouds really easily. You can search for things and it will pop up every keyword that happened in a page. So it's like a mini database of what you browse. Justin Seitz is the guy who made both Hunchly and this course, which is Automated OSINT with Python. A really good course as well. I'd highly recommend it. SecTalks does have a discount if you want to go ahead and buy that. I think it's like 900 Oz, so it's a bit expensive, but it's very well worth it. So again, OSINT's a huge process, and I guess these are some of just the very fundamental things you can use to kind of keep going once you've got those small little bits of information to continue on. And this kind of leads on to the CTF, so I'm not going to stop a beat here. I'm going to go straight into the CTF because my hope is that we can spend more time in the CTF and you can experience some of these kind of methods and I guess processes for yourselves. So I will get a hands up if anyone has ever heard of the Wallamai pine or the Wallamai nobilis. I'd be really surprised if anyone doesn't. And you'll find out very soon why I'm so excited about this. So the Wallamai nobilis, or the Wallamai pine, was a tree that was discovered in 1994 by a guy called David Noble. He was a canyoner, and he was canyoning around trying to find different canyons, and he came across this tree that has never been found in the entire world ever before, and it only grows in one canyon at the time in the Wallamai State Forest. One canyon, there's about 20 trees left, and they are seriously Jurassic looking. They're a tree from the Jurassic past. They have no types of offspring ancestors. They're all one kind of genus. I'm not a horticulturalist or whatever it might be, but they literally have one genus. So they've been purebred kind of Jurassic trees for the longest time. So that's pretty cool. And the fact is that a lot of people, obviously canyoners or nature enthusiasts, want to go and find this tree. It's like finding the rarest tree in the world, but it's here in our backyard and it's in a canyon somewhere where there are descriptions of, but no one's actually found it. Or they have, but they keep it on the down low. Now, at this point in time, it is basically tightly controlled by fences, New South Wales Park Services officers. If people go and visit the tree, like scientists, which there's only a select few, they're all blindfolded. They use the same pilots all the time to actually fly them there. They make it incredibly hard for anyone to find this in the wild, let alone access it. There was even a road that used to draw past that area. It was like within 15 kilometers of the site, and they blew the entire road up with dynamite so that no one could even drive down it anymore. Like, they're tough on making sure this tree is never, ever found, the original location, other than the people that know where it is. Scientists have redacted it for many, many years. Politicians have as well. There was actually a political group that came up saying, everyone has a right to know, similar to open source intelligence, I guess, but abusing it. And they wanted everyone to know, so they published it in a newspaper. That newspaper had one of the most incredible redactions of all time, where you can barely find it. You can barely find the mentions of it. You can find all the parliamentary hearings and inquiries and so forth about it, and all of them are redacted. Now, some interesting things about this is that, this was a containment effort on a breach where the location was mentioned. And the location has happened a few times on the web. And each time it has been absolutely shut down by Park Service, which is incredible when you think about it, because they're the Park Service. But they're doing a better job than some of the biggest companies today in redacting or taking away that information. Having this conversation with a few hackers, some people have kind of said, maybe it's because in Australia and the servers are all here and, the websites are able to take it down easily and so forth. But they've done an incredible job at keeping it secret and safe. One of the famous hackers here in Melbourne said to me once, just like it's hard to get non-hackers to care about security, it's really hard to get non-outdoor people to get, aware of nature and conservation. So one of the things or the rules in this is that, the fact is this is a massive OSINT operation where no one's been able to find the geographic locations of this tree. But the thing is, it is protected, and for a reason. People have visited it before, they've introduced pathogens, and some of those trees have died. So the last thing anyone wants is people to be putting this online or spreading it around and finding it. However, the process is amazing. It's an incredible journey of finding all these different items and seeing what some people have done in recreating photographs and videos for the last 10 years and drawing it and putting it into 3D models just to find that exact canyon and the location where this tree is pretty amazing. If there's people interested in geospatial intelligence as well, looking for this tree within, say, Google Maps or satellite pictures or drone pictures and so forth is an incredible process that has, kept happening and no one's really come to that ultimatum of where it is. Again, only found in the Wollemi National Park out of the entire world. And so just like OSINT engagements where you're searching for people or assets and that kind of thing, where it's personal identifiable information, we want to keep this stuff on the down low. So if you can, we would like any submissions of anything that you find just to be private and to submit to us. Just because, you're good people and we want to protect nature and conservation because we're all very passionate about this tree. In fact, I currently own one myself. After those conservation efforts took place, they replicated them. There are thousands of these available now that you can buy, but the original location is that one thing that we do want to protect. So we want to try and find, or we want you to try and experience how to find the Wollemi Pine, the original location where David Noble, the canyoner, managed to look at it and find it. And the other thing is the canyon itself. It's called Jurassic Canyon. There's many things online about it, and it's incredible trying to map it and find out where it would be within maps and geographical maps and canyoning maps and hand-drawing maps and so forth. So you might be able to submit GPS coordinates, maps, books, location-based data. Those are all included. And the winner will obviously get a conservation-created Wollemi Pine. Yes, we'll give you the actual tree. You'll also get a Visa gift card for $250, a Hunchley license, and a Raspberry Pi 3. That's all for someone who gives some confident results or at least shows us the process they went through. Again, warning, do not release this online. This is something we want to treat with respect. The process is fun, but keep in mind everything we've said about it being protected. It's something we're very passionate about, and do not try and attempt the tree if you find it online or if you find those locations and details. I realize how bad this is trying to say to a room full of hackers, but do not try and visit this tree or release it online. There is the 3 kind of references that we'll give you for it. That's all we're giving you. There are some incredible things that you'll find and learn along the way, especially about nature and conservation and trees and how they're born and protected against fire and live in canyons and so forth. No, I haven't done the search myself. And so you can go and find them all there. And that's it from me at roughly, I think it's 7 o'clock. At roughly